Good evening, everyone. My name is Isabella Choate. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a proud disabled person, CEO of the Youth Disability Advocacy Network, founder of the Disability Pride Festival in WA, and your host for tonight. It is my honour to welcome you to the 2025 Federal Election Disability Forum. A visual description of myself is I am a Chinese Australian person with brown skin, brown hair and facial jewellery, and tonight I'm wearing a black top, black and white patterned pants and some ridiculously chunky white heels, which I have to show you. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathering here today on Whadjuk Noongar Boodja, the unceded lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's lands that we work on across WA. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging and recognise their enduring connection and protection of country, culture and community. I'd like to extend a welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today and recognise the disproportionate impact our system has on First Nations people with disability. I acknowledge that this land was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd also like to recognise and welcome those in the room and online with living experience of disability. I'd like to thank you all for showing up authentically in whatever capacity you have to be present. It is difficult living in a world that was not made for us in mind, and I recognise the efforts and dedication of our community to improving the system for ourselves as well as those who come after us. This forum is a collaborative effort hosted by People with Disabilities WA, the Youth Disability Advocacy Network, Developmental Disabilities WA, and the National Disability Services of WA. With so much change occurring in the sector and the fears that have gripped our community for the past 12 months in particular, it is so important that we are able to collaborate and put on events like this for our community. Looking around the room, I can see how in demand a platform like this is, and I'm really grateful for the support from DDWA, PWdWA and NDS for hosting this event. From now on, I will be using those acronyms, but if you need me to repeat them, I'll repeat them at some point. We're really privileged to have a distinguished panel representing key political parties today, including Minister for Youth and Minister assisting the Minister of the NDIS, Dr. Ayaan Ali, MP from the Australian Labor Party, Shadow Assistant Minister for the NDIS and Shadow Assistant Minister for Mental Health, Senator Hollie Hughes from the Liberal Party, and Senator Jordon Steele-John from the Australian Greens, who will be joining us online because unfortunately he has a cold, but we very much appreciate that he is not here sharing his cold. Additionally, we are honoured to have esteemed guest speakers join us today, including Rachel Siewert, Deputy CEO of the WA Council of Social Services, Ross Joyce, CEO of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, and Frances Buchanan, WA State Manager of the National Disability Services, who will deliver our closing remarks. Before we commence, I would like to highlight some of the accessibility features available to us tonight and mention some housekeeping. So Auslan interpreters are present both in person and on our Zoom live stream. There are closed captions which are working perfectly, which is very exciting. Sometimes they don't always work so well. There are wheelchair accessible toilets past the foyer and to the left. Additionally, we understand that some of the topics discussed tonight might be distressing. We do have some support staff on hand, so please reach out to them if you need. Tonight is being recorded and will be available online afterwards should you need to leave early or pass it. Don't know what I was writing there. We would love to see you sharing this event on your social media, and please consider tagging YDAN, PWdWA, DDWA and the NDIS. We also have a roving photographer today, so if you don't want your photo taken, please just let them know. They won't be offended, that is absolutely fine. And additionally, we have a quiet room available to those who may need it. So it's past the foyer and to the right. There are fidget toys, there's colouring in, there's some earmuffs, so please check out that space if you need it. This evening, we have a unique opportunity to engage directly with federal election candidates. The way this is going to be run tonight is we're going to hear from Kat Johns, CEO of PWdWA, Rachel Siewert and Ross Joyce. Then we're going to invite the panel up. The panel will have 2 minutes to make their election pitch. And after that, we'll have some questions from representatives in the Kimberley, from the Wheat Belt, and from some young people. And then we'll open up the floor to the audience. So please have a think about any questions that you would like to ask, and we will facilitate that. Finally, we'll close the night with a speech from Frances Buchanan. I hope that by the end of this evening, we'll have a really good idea about how each party plans to prioritise disability in this upcoming election. To begin, please join me in welcoming CEO of People with Disabilities WA, Kat Johns, the organisation led by and for people with disability.
Hi, good evening. I hope you've enjoyed some canopies and drinks on the way in. That was the fun part. So yes, it's all kind of downhill from here, really. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's going to be a great night and a good opportunity for people to ask questions of candidates, which I think is really important that we get this opportunity to hear from our leaders or decision makers in the community. So I'm Kat Johns, the CEO of People with Disabilities Western Australia, relatively new to the role. I did get my first grey hair over the weekend, so now I feel like I've been fully inducted into CEO life, which is great. If you're not already a member of PWdWA, you can join for free online. All of our full members are people with disability, all of our board are people with disability, and quite a lot of our staff as well. So we do come from a very living experience perspective, and we are really pleased to be partnering with the organisations to put on this forum, so YDAN and NDS and DDWA. So thank you so much. It's been really good to work with you. We've kind of organised this in about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, so it's been quite a lot of work, but we really wanted to do this for the community, and it is, I think, you know, in terms of the people in the room, it's a relatively grassroots event, I think, although I was saying earlier that this is probably the literal poshest venue that we have ever had anything in. So yeah, I guess on with some of the serious stuff. Some things that we do know already, and we haven't directed the agenda, so you can ask whatever you like, and we actually want to know what's important to you as people with disability and people working with or caring for, or, you know, just people that care about people with disability in the community. So you can ask whatever you like, but some things that we do know are that when I talk to people with disability are often saying that things are getting worse recently. Our community was promised a national disability insurance scheme where nobody would be worse off. Yet we know most people with disability don't have access to it. And what was once a long lobbied for dream has turned into a nightmare for many people who are being removed from the NDIS, who cannot get access, or people who live in regional and remote locations where services just don't exist in a market model. So that might come up tonight. I'd be surprised if it doesn't, but we don't know. Our community ask that, you know, what's going to be offered to fill the gaps with regards to those, you know, 90% or, you know, the many people that don't have access to the NDIS. Many of our members and community have given evidence to the Royal Commission, and we do know that there is a roadmap for WA, and so, you know, we're very keen to find out how the federal and the state government are going to work together to make sure that these recommendations are actually accepted and that implementation plan is actually delivered and implemented in a reasonable timeframe to address you know, all those issues that have come up in the Royal Commission. And, you know, community attitudes haven't changed enough. It's very hard for us to be proud sometimes when we're still excluded. So I'm sure our panellists would agree that this just isn't good enough. And, you know, I think all the panellists tonight are very passionate about this issue, and thank you so much for coming, because this is a brave thing to do. You are much braver than me in terms of, coming to talk to the community. We know that you do care about the community, and we'd like to really hear from you about what you think the solutions are to solve some of the problems that people are going to ask about tonight. So thank you so much for your time, and everybody else who's come. I'll hand back to Izzy now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kat, and you've got a little way to catch up because I have many grey hairs. I really appreciate your thoughts and living experience, and watching your leadership has been really incredible. It's been a privilege to work alongside you. I'd now like to introduce our esteemed guest, Rachel Siewert, to the stage. Rachel is the Deputy CEO of the WA Council of Social Services, which leads networks and policy platforms across the sector, including for people with disability. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. First off, I too would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledging that we have a lot of unfinished business in this country that certainly WACOSS, and I'm sure you are too, are committed to addressing. And I'm thinking also of the disproportionate number of First Nations people living with disability and still haven't got access to all the services and supports that they need. Thank you for inviting me today. Noting that there's 5.5 million, and I realise there's different figures around the place, million people plus their families, people with disability plus their families and friends and allies vote. And so this sort of forum is really important to remind people that people with disability are a force to be reckoned with, and their votes count and can influence who wins power. So again, I think that's why this is really important. There are many issues that you are dealing with and you want to put, and we all want to put on the national agenda. And I'm focused nationally here because we're talking about a federal election. There's obviously a whole lot of stuff in WA that we need to be addressing too. But what comes to mind at a national level really importantly is the NDIS. And the fact is it has never delivered on its promise. It still holds a lot of promise, but we need a lot to be done still to the NDIS, and the changes that we're seeing aren't necessarily positive changes, particularly when we're starting to talk about foundational supports. Who remembers the ILC? Never happened, really, did it, folks? And what happened when the NDIS came in, and I'm going to quickly run out of time, so make sure you ding me. What happened with the NDIS is that, and what we're seeing now is a reduction, trying to cut services, not adequately fund it, and of course we've got foundational supports. And foundational supports are supposed to be targeted at the early years, particularly here in Western Australia, and we're supposed to be coming in July. We still don't have them. But also, what happens past those early years? I'm touching briefly on things without diving deeply into them. There are around 16.5 million people. 16.5% of people with disability living in poverty, compared to around 10.2 for people who do not have a disability. In other words, again, people with disability are more significantly affected, can't find accommodation, and in Australia at the moment, we all know what housing is like. So we need to be focusing on better supports for people with disability. We need to be increasing job seeker payment, because we know that there's a lot of people that are trying to exist on job seeker payment because they can't access DSP, neither of which are enough. Which then takes me very quickly to the issues around employment. And I noticed I did pay a lot of attention to the Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre report last year that talked about the fact that we haven't seen significant improvement with employment for people with disability in the last 20 years, despite all the supposed programs. And I've got a quote here from that report where it talked about the lack of progress in labour market reform inclusion appears symptomatic of a wider failure of public reforms to alleviate the barriers people with disability experience in participating fully in society. And I think that, for me, that said a lot, and I think that's an issue that we need to be talking about tonight. Why aren't we seeing those barriers tumbling when we're still seeing such a high rate of people not being able to gain employment, not being able to access supports that they need, not seeing an NDIS that truly delivers, and I don't think we're going to see some of those foundational supports in place by July. By the beginning of July, it's going to be really difficult. So there's lots to talk about tonight that I hope that just touches on a few of the issues that I'll certainly be listening out for. Ask really tough questions. Some of you know I've been there, done that. Ask the really hard questions so that we can get some progress in the spaces that we all think are really important. I think I went over my time, and apologies.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You've touched on some really important points, and at YDAN we have a program called Unleashed, which is around supporting young people with disability to learn about employment. And one of the things when it was co-designed is we targeted it for additional things like learning how to disclose your disability in the workplace and asking for workplace adjustments. But what we actually found is that young people with disability are being discriminated against so much that they don't have the basic understanding of employment. So we had to really pull that back and go, well, this is what a pay slip is. This is what part-time and casual work is. We had one participant who was okay with me sharing that in 3 months they applied to 150 jobs, heard back from one, and that was a no. So thank you, Rachel. Really important points. I would now like to invite Ross Joyce, CEO of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, to speak about the Fair Australia campaign, and Ross will be joining us online. Please help me welcome Ross.
Thank you very much. It's Ross here, the CEO of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight and join you in this election evening that's been put on by PWdWA, and would certainly like to thank Kat and all the team for making this all happen as well. So it's great to be here. I'm actually in regional Victoria, so on the east coast, but we're very happy to join our colleagues, friends and members on the west coast, and it's particularly important with the election about to happen that we have a bit of a discussion about what are we doing in terms of a national campaign that we're looking at. And as it was introduced, we're operating the Fair Australia campaign. That's something that we're doing in partnership with the Australian Autism Alliance. And we're also pleased to say we have the support of a number of other organisations, such as our good colleagues at Disability Employment Australia, who is the national peak body for the majority of the disability employment services providers. We also have a couple of our members, Deafness Forum of Australia, who have also pitched in to the campaign, and also Deaf Australia, who've also pitched in for our campaign. What's our campaign about? Well, our campaign is in principle about ensuring we have an inclusive and equitable Australia for people with disability by 2031. That's our overlying message on it. But what's that comprise then? So we've got a number of asks that within our campaign. Key principle one of that is to ensure that government provides leadership. We think for far too long there's been a very siloed approach across government at the federal level in how people with disability are treated, in how the policies are decided on, and that there's not an overarching coordination of that happening across all the departments, whether you're talking about social services, education, health, transport, etc. We think there's an opportunity now, and that was presented principally from the recommendations from our Disability Royal Commission, the 222 recommendations. We'd like to see more work happening on implementing all of those right across the country. And one of those key recommendations was recommendation 5.6. That sought to have a Minister for Inclusion and also a Department for Inclusion and Equity created for people with disability. We think it's a game changer. We've fully supported it ever since those recommendations came out back in 2023. And AFDO and all of our members were key to make sure that happened last year. We, of course, were disappointed with the response that came from the federal government at the time. Whilst they did adopt a number of recommendations, they only noted 5.6. And to us, that's the recommendation we think will be a game changer for all 5.5 million people with disability right across Australia. And we'd like to see that happen. We'd like to see that there's a cabinet level minister appointed in charge into that role. That's what we're pushing all of the parties on and all of the independents to say that this is a key plank that we see would make a huge difference for every person with disability right across the country. On top of that, we want to see the employment side of things for people with disability really focused on. And we think that it's really important the Australian Public Service lifts its game, and that at a federal level, we ensure that there's at least 15% of people with disability employed across all of the Australian Public Service and its agencies. And that would see a tremendous boost. At the moment, as most of you would realise, the Australian Public Service Commission had a target of 7%, which actually they were to meet by June this year. They're not meeting that, and in July last year, they reported that on average, they were hitting about 5.2%. And there's a couple of the departments or agencies that are doing better than that. And of course, one of those, as you would expect, is the National Disability Insurance Agency. We think that we can use the National Disability Insurance Agency and how they've been working towards that target to highlight how other departments and agencies can lift their game and improve on that. We think the 15% is a reasonable target for all government departments and agencies to aspire to and to work towards. And again, we want to see that happen in a timely manner. So we think it's important, but we also think it's really important that people with disability are employed across all levels within the public service, not just at an entry level. We think it's important there is career progression and that's demonstrated in the reporting that they provide. Other reporting to be provided on employment is for those organisations that employ 100 plus employees right around Australia. We want to see that the levels of people with disability that are employed and engaged in those businesses is reported on an annual basis as well. We think by doing that, we can start to build the impact, lift the game, and lift that through with all industries right across, even those that are employing less than 100 employees. So we think it's good if we can focus on that and bring that forward. And the other side in that we want to see is recognising the voice of people with disability and recognising the voice in terms of ensuring that sufficient funding and resources is provided to all representative organisations for people with disability right across the country. And that includes obviously our organisation, which undertakes systemic advocacy, and the others that do that, but also recognising individual advocacy and also individual legal advocacy. We think that there's a need to make sure that we lift the game in that regard and that those voices are heard loud and clear and that they're underpinned to undertake the work that all of them do right across the country, which makes a significant change for many, many people with disability. The other side of that is looking at procurement for the federal government, and we think that that should be favouring those organisations that are definitely walking the talk in terms of inclusion and diversity within their workplaces. So we think we've got a range of things in our charter. If you want to jump on board and have a look at what we're doing, you can go to fairaustralia.au. So www.fairaustralia, all one word, .au, and have a look at our charter in there. The charter sets out the entire vision. We think it's a great one. Again, I go back to, we think the key plank to that is ensuring that we have a Minister for Disability and a Department for Disability Inclusion, and bring that in, because we think that's the only way we're going to get away from what's currently been happening, where things are worked on across the federal government in particular in a disjointed fashion. We want to see somebody coordinating all of that policy, all of that work that needs to happen, and ensuring that it takes place, and that no department goes about its work with any policies that may affect any person with disability without having had that department work on that with the relevant organisation as well. So that's essentially it in a nutshell. That's where we're coming from. We're running a strong campaign. We are going to be doing quite a range of things at the moment. We're just setting up to go through a number of marginal seats with an online forum where we'll be talking with the candidates. So we're working on that at least across 4 seats around Australia. And we are certainly looking at one in WA to do that with as well. So taking on board advice from PWdWA and others that are our members across the WA area. What can you do for that? We'd like you to get on board, pledge your support to our campaign, help us to work that through, prove the numbers. But more importantly, we'd also like you, if you have some relevant examples of that, where there's been a lack of coordination, we'd like to get those case studies, because we think that that really makes it relatable. If we can prove, and we know that it happens, but if we can also prove by a relevant range of case studies right across the country, inclusive of those in not just metropolitan areas, we want to hear from rural, regional and remote areas as well, because we think that that proves to the pollies, you know, exactly what's going on, and the candidates will listen to those stories. It makes it a very powerful narrative when you get really powerful stories that we know are out there and we hear about them all the time. So anyone that can provide those, we'd really appreciate that support, and that way we can ensure that we get good take up on our campaign, and of course prove the value of what we're saying, and that is we want to see an inclusive and equitable Australia for all people with disability by 2031. And that's not only those that are NDIS participants. We think that that's an important area, but as you know, they only equate to around about 670,000 out of the 5.5 million people with disability right around the country. So it's an important one. We think that that'll make a big difference. So I'd encourage you to jump on board, have a look at our campaign. And somebody said to me, oh, if you're doing your campaign, and are we able to tack on with any other campaigns? Of course you are. We're also looking at backing that, and that's AFDO and also the Australian Autism Alliance. We're looking at backing other campaigns that we think are important as well. We think it's about time that we got a good voice, though, for people with disability. And we think that the way to do that is to get that ministry and cabinet level minister. So thank you so much. That's a quick one from me on the wrap up about it, but there's a lot more on the website, and more than happy to also provide further information through to your various organisations or across this platform as well. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Ross. A big thank you to Ross for joining us online and sharing important details about AFDO's campaign. I look forward to watching the forum that they're going to put on. So now is the exciting part where I'm going to introduce the panel. So firstly, I would like to introduce, representing the Liberals, is Senator Hollie Hughes, Shadow Assistant Minister for the NDIS and Shadow Assistant Minister for Mental Health. Welcome, Hollie. Joining us online and representing the Australian Greens Party is Senator Jordon Steele-John. Please join me in welcoming Senator Jordon. If he comes up on the screen, perhaps. And last but absolutely not least is representing Labor is Dr. Anne Ali, Minister for Youth and Minister assisting the Minister of the NDIS. Welcome, Dr. Anne. Alrighty, I'm going to take a seat finally and give my feet a rest. So, panellists, you are going to have 2 minutes for your election pitch, and I will be timing, okay? So you will probably hear my phone ringing, but if not, I will just politely tell you that it's time. So, Minister Ali, would you like to start us off?
Yes? Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. Can I just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I'd like to extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us here in the room today. My name is Anne Ali. My pronouns are she, her. Does that come out of my 2 minutes? Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the organisers. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to be here to really put forward primarily, mostly actually, to hear from all of you about what a future would look like for an Australia where it is actually fair and equitable for people with disabilities. I'm very proud to be part of the government that started the NDIS. It is, with all its faults, it is a world-leading and world-first national system with a really noble underpinning. And that noble underpinning being the recognition, to begin with, the recognition that people living with disability have or should have control and choice over their lives so that they can fully participate in life in the way that they want to. Now, I know, and I've heard loud and clear today, that it's not working for everyone. But we are working towards making it work for everyone with a participant-centred approach to the NDIS. We've done a lot of investment into the NDIS over the last 3 years that we have been in government, really trying to get the NDIS back on track to it being what it was originally for, really bringing it back to being about supporting people living with disability to be able to have choice, to be able to have control over their lives, and to be able to live with dignity, The findings of the Royal Commission were absolutely harrowing, devastating and incredibly eye-opening. And I take Ross's point about working through the recommendations of the Royal Commission. We will continue to do the work that's needed to get the NDIS back to its original ethos, if you like.
Thank you, Minister. That's time. Thank you. Senator Steele-John, would you please go next? I will start the timer and I will speak on the microphone because you can't hear the phone ringing. When you're ready, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And let me just start as well by acknowledging that we are gathered on First Nations land and pay respects to elders past and present. I'm really sorry that I can't be there with you in person this evening. I've got some kind of chesty coffee cold thing. I'm really hoping that it's so close to the time that I last had COVID that it's not COVID, but I thought it would be poor form to share it with you all this evening, both as a disabled person and as the health spokesperson for the Australian Greens. I want to just quickly lay out the kind of foundation of the Greens' policy proposals for our community at this election. We have heard really clearly from so many disabled people that life is so tough in this moment, that people are struggling with the cost of living, particularly with the cost of food, with access to healthcare, with access to housing. And if you are a disabled person, those struggles which exist across our entire community are a lot tougher for you. And it has got more difficult to be a disabled person, particularly since the significant cuts that have been made to the NDIS over the last year, initiated by Labor and supported by the Liberals. And we have heard from so many constituents that those changes, the laws that were forced through the Parliament in July of last year, have resulted in the removal of services and the removal of access in precisely the way that so many in our community were concerned about. So the Greens, of course, are here tonight pledging to reverse those cuts and to restore that access for those that have adopt the scheme. And we also know that we need to go further, not only to make sure that those with psychosocial disabilities that have been removed and have nowhere to go, because there is no such thing as a foundational support at the moment, no agreement on what those should be, that there should be direct financial supports paid to folks so that they can literally survive, and that we must do these things while also tackling ableism in education, in healthcare, in housing, and actively work to bring down the barriers that block us out of those spaces. Yes,
Thank you, Senator. That is time, unfortunately.
Yes, we need a Department of Disability, but we also need to see a properly and fully funded advocacy sector.
I wonder if you can hear us online. Right. Thank you so much, Senator. Much appreciated.
I didn't hear either the phone or the microphone. I'm sorry about that.
You are so fine. Perhaps I will do a bit of a wave next time and see if you can see us on screen. Senator Hughes, it is now your 2 minutes. Please start when you're ready.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here tonight. It's great to see my old friend Rachel Siewert from our community affairs days, travelling around the country. But it's wonderful to be here, and before you think some wise man from the east has turned up, I actually went to school in Perth and lived over here, so I, whilst not born and bred West Australian and here anymore, I do love WA and miss Perth. So I'm just going to cover off a couple of issues because there's a lot of issues. But when we talk about what election commitments are, my feeling around the NDIS, and I'm the mother of a participant, so I have a vested interest as well as a political interest, is not only the sustainability of the scheme and making sure that it is fit for purpose and that it is delivering what it was supposed to deliver for whom it was supposed to deliver, but this scheme was supported across the board. This should be a bipartisan scheme. It should not be used as a political football. And I do think it's time that everyone gets together, put their big boy pants on and realise that this scheme does need reform if it's going to be sustainable in the long run, but it needs to be something that's worked on together. Jordon and I, for the past 19 months, have had a thing in the Senate that we've referred to as NDIS Monday, because the Senate had demanded from the government documents around the financial sustainability framework. The Senate demanded the documents, the government has refused to provide them. So every Monday we had poor Minister John Farrell sent in to explain or just tell us we weren't going to get them. So we would speak to this every single week of the Senate, which was usually NDIS Monday, but we did NDIS Tuesday every now and then as well. Bill Shorten promised there'd be no cuts with these reforms. Well, I can tell you that was a lie. It was an absolute out-and-out lie. Lots and lots of people have received cuts, including my son. So I can tell you it was a lie. We know the NDIA is spending more money on lawyers than it is in so much helping people. So we need to make sure we have significant reform around the legal process and how the planning model is working so that people aren't being forced to the tribunal. Foundational supports, everyone's going to ask questions about them, so I might save that till later. But what we need to remember is this is a demand-driven scheme. If we're going to make it sustainable, the only way we do that is through the number of participants or the size of the plans. That's it. And so we all need to really work together on what this is going to look like, how it's fit for purpose. And remember, this is an insurance scheme. That was what it was set up for. Invest early, produce better outcomes for people to live fuller lives. At the moment, that is actually not what's being delivered by most providers. And in fact, all of us that have done a planning meeting know that we cannot share with the agency any joy, any success, any advancement, because they'll go, that's great, we can cut your plan. And so it's depressing.
That is time.
So I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panellists for their election pitch. Much appreciated. All right, so now we're going to move on. I have some questions that have been sent in, and the way that the question time is going to work is you're going to have even less time than you did for your election pitch.
How difficult that is for us.
Oh, yes, yes. And I appreciated that you can see my mic going up. Unfortunately, Jordon can't, but hopefully I will give you some cues there. So I'm going to ask some questions, and then we will have some roving microphones, and we'll have people monitoring online. If the panellists could please keep your responses to 1 minute each, and I will stop you should you go over time. So the first question is, there are concerns around the implementation of foundational supports, largely being that they have yet to be defined and the responsibility has not been determined to belong to state or federal governments. Historically, WA has missed out when federal governments allocate funding, as WA is geographically distinct from other states and territories. How will you ensure that foundational supports will be appropriately resourced in WA? And I will pass to Minister Anne Hollie first.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. Look, to be very clear, foundational supports isn't about kicking people out of the NDIS. It's about building a new system of supports for the kinds of supports that people need that may not be part of the NDIS. That's what it's about. We're working through that all with the states and territories, and I appreciate the angst about what that means for participants on the NDIS, but it is something that is being worked through, including being worked through the kind of the infrastructure and the responsibilities that are required at the state level and at the Commonwealth level, and the governance frameworks from state and Commonwealth in order to provide a sound framework for foundational supports. So whilst I appreciate the angst about foundational supports, I do want to assure people that it is not about kicking people off the NDIS. It's actually about providing a new framework of supports for those things that cannot be or will not be part of the NDIS.
Thank you. Minister, you say that the foundational supports are not about kicking people off the NDIS. I would like to ask about, since the NDIS Amendment Bill has come into act, we are hearing from community that there are hundreds of people who are being removed from the NDIS without any referrals to services and supports to replace these. So how would you respond to people who are being kicked off the NDIS when you say that foundational supports are not about kicking people off?
I would say that if anyone has that experience, please contact my office and contact the department if there are individual experiences there. I would also say on that the assessment for NDIS has not changed. The assessments are still the same, particularly, and I'm going to refer particularly to children who have either come in as early intervention or through other means to the NDIS, to being assessed at 6 years of age and being assessed at 9 years of age. That's always happened. That's always been part of the NDIS, having those assessments at those two ages, recognising that developmental delays with the right kind of supports and therapies may not be required to continue throughout a child's life. So the assessment process itself has not changed. If people are experiencing those kinds of experiences with assessments, please reach out.
Thank you, Minister. I expect that there will be lots of people reaching out to you, and we will pass your details on. Senator Steele-John, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I heard it. I'm more than I can certainly respond.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so here's the problem. There's no such thing as a foundational support. The Commonwealth government and the state and territory governments have not been able to agree on a definition of what that support is. So they don't exist. The problem created by that, one of the many problems, is that people are already being kicked off the scheme right now. About 28,000 people have been subject to eligibility reassessments since the laws were passed in July of last year, with thousands being removed as a result of those reassessments. Supports have been systemically and systematically cut. And what has changed, what the law did, the law passed by this Labor government and supported by the Liberals, was to remove the rights and protections which enabled us as people to fight those decisions to attempt to remove our support. So we don't have them, therefore we can't make a case as to how they would be better funded for WA. We do know that they must be nationally consistent because we cannot go back to a system where we as people in Western Australia are basically trapped.
Thank you, Senator. That is time. I will give you a wave as well if you can see me online. Thank you. Senator Hughes, if you could respond to the question, please.
Yeah, so Senator Steele-John's correct when he says we really don't know what a foundational support is. We did ask a lot of questions at the last round of Senate estimates, and things like foundational supports are fundamentally what the ILC grants were supposed to have funded. They were supposed to be the tier 2. They were supposed to be the organisations and community groups that provided supports to the community so that people could access activities and groups that they wanted to participate in their local community and have the supports within those organisations themselves. Fundamentally, that program, shock horror, like so much else in this behemoth, has not delivered what was promised. The problem is, and no one politically wants to say any of these things, no one wants to remove anything to put something new in place, and this is not a never-ending pot of money. This will and fall over if the sustainability issues are not addressed. So a foundational support, one of the examples we were given, and I know when my kids were little, we used to go to sort of a community music group that, you know, you went with your kids and a couple of mums would run it, and there was a structure to the class, and there was a national body or a state body that ran it. But you would go and you would have kids with a disability and kids without a disability there with their parents participating in whatever that music group would have looked like. What's happening now is people are being pushed or looking to go onto the NDIS stream, and that is leading to children then going into disability-specific programs. So that, if you want to talk about inclusion, is not starting inclusion at the earliest of ages. We need to go back to some of these things.
Much appreciated. So this question is going to follow on from some of the things that were just raised. And so obviously it's been mentioned that since the amendment bill has come into act, the community has either heard or experienced NDIS plans being cut without any referrals. Can you please state what your party will do and commit to doing to prevent the further erosion of systems of support for our most vulnerable community members? I'll pass to you, Minister Ali.
So I will give a brief outline of what we have invested into the NDIS over the last 3 years and where we're going from there, okay? So we've got, I think the most important thing though is the voice of people with lived experience of disability being co-designed and being part of the reforms that we do in response to the Royal Commission and in response to the NDIS review. And that's been very central to what this government has done, ensuring that the voices and the input of people with disability, living with disability, are included. Beyond the NDIS, we've got another $5.4 billion over 4 years to help people with disability prepare to find suitable employment. We've got the National Disability Data Asset to improve understanding of the experiences of people with disability. We've got a new evidence-based preemptive early intervention pilots for, that's called the Inklings program. If anyone knows about the Inklings program, it's a great program from Telethon Kids. We've got the National Autism Strategy, and that's $42 million towards that action plan, $44 million to extend the key disability advocacy programs, and we continue to respond to the NDIS review with changes to SDA, to accommodation as well. So there are a number of things that we're doing to ensure that that viability of the NDIS, bringing the NDIS, as I said, back to its original ethos, but ensuring that people who rely on all of the supports that they may have gotten previously through the NDIS, but who may not be able to get those supports after the changes to the NDIS as we bring it back to its original ethos, that those supports are available in some other form.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Steele-John, the same question to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so very briefly, the Greens are proposing a full restoration of all funds cut from the NDIS. That's some 80 billion we believe should go back into disability supports. We also recognise there is a need for immediate support to those with psychosocial disabilities that have been kicked off the scheme, and so we are proposing twice yearly direct payments of $2,500 to those participants and their families to help fund some of the gaps that have opened up in therapeutic supports and other services. We're also proposing a removal of the age cap on the NDIS, a very discriminatory device that prevents those over the age of 65 from entering the scheme or staying in the scheme, and a full restoration of sexual support services to be able to be, to be able to be provided under the scheme. We'll do this in combination with an increase of funding to advocacy organisations as well.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes, please, your response.
Thank you. And I must say it's interesting to hear Anne talking about the Disability Royal Commission. Since the government took 10 months to respond to the recommendations, there were 222 recommendations, of which they've accepted 13. So I'm not sure why the government's relying on their great commitment to the Disability Royal Commission as some values-based response to the disability community, because I think it's been rather lacklustre. The National Autism Strategy, well, I'm pleased that that's happened, because that was the recommendation, the first recommendation from the Senate Select Committee that I set up and chaired and ran, and was the first whole of life review of those with autism. And unfortunately, the National Autism Strategy and the original white paper that took over 2 years for this government to produce was nothing but a poor summation of our 81 recommendations. So again, though, like you sitting here as the parent of a child, I know as much as you do about what's going on, because there's been zero bipartisan reach out to discuss and perhaps look at what we learnt through a joint Senate Select Committee that ran for 2 years across this country. So the $42 million is great, but if you've got a child with profound autism, there's zero for it in it for you, because that was completely overlooked. The only money in this budget that was announced by the government was for more lawyers for the NDIA. So that's actually what this government's priority is, funding. So if you look at budget paper number 2, which is where all the details are, which is about a quarter of the size of last year's budget paper number 2, if that doesn't tell you this was a budget for 5 weeks, not 5 years, but the only NDIA funding that was in there was more money for more lawyers. So
thank you, Senator.
That's the priority.
Minister, I wanted to provide you with the opportunity to respond to those comments.
Yeah, look, I didn't come here to have a political stoush with you, Hollie. I really didn't. But you know, I think it's when you have a Liberal Party who is calling for cuts to the NDIS.
That's not true.
To stop growth more than nominal GDP. And I'll translate for you what that means. That means $2.1 billion a year of cuts, and that means stopping 72,000 people from getting onto the NDIS. Labor came up with the NDIS. Labor put into place the NDIS, and when we inherited the NDIS from the Liberals in 2022, it was an absolute mess. There's a lot of work that we need to do to get the NDIS back on track and make it sustainable. And I know that both Jordon and Hollie agree that the NDIS needs to be sustainable so that it is there for those who most need it. The work that we've been doing has been a lot of mopping up of the absolute mess that the NDIS was left in, and bringing the NDIS back to its original purpose and ensuring that it's sustainable, but also ensuring that people are not left out in the cold. And I know that nothing's perfect. If I can make that, and I speak to a lot of disability advocates, I've spoken to a lot of people in the sector, I speak to people with lived experience of disability as well. I know that it's not perfect, but I can assure you that if you were to look at who or which government would most likely make those changes to the NDIS to make it the best possible scheme that it could, I would go with the government that started in the first place, that had the vision to set up an NDIS in the first place.
Thank you, Minister.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to just jump in, as I would if I was in there in person. Just to reflect on the fact that Labor's last budget cut the NDIS by $14.4 billion, and this most recent budget added an additional $3 billion of that cut, including direct cuts to people's plans. So I think what we are seeing is both sides of politics actually very happy to cut money from disabled people rather than tax corporations, or maybe not buy so many nuclear submarines is a proposal that I think we should explore. But this idea that one side or the other at this election is the party of the defence of the NDIS, I think treats disabled people as far less engaged with the reality of politics over the last year than we actually are.
Thank you very much, Senator, and I really appreciate this ongoing conversation. I think it's really important that we can allow space for people to respond to each other in real time. I have a question here from a young person, and it's directed to you, Minister Ali, but I will reframe for the rest of the panel as well. So firstly, I wanted to commend you for re-establishing the Office of Youth. I think it's a really important thing that young people are represented in decision-making forums. In the recent round of the National Youth Advisory Groups, there were groups on civic engagement, climate change, creative industries, a group for First Nations people, and for prevention of gender-based violence. People with disability exist across all of these issues, and considering the massive reform in our sector, why was there not a disability advisory group?
Fantastic question, and I really appreciate it. I have a policy with my advisory groups that every advisory group should have a young person with disability represented there, a young First Nations person represented in each advisory group, recognising that the issues for young people with disability cut across. And we talked earlier about, Ross was talking about silos and cutting across all of those. And recognising that the issues for young people with disability sit in employment and sit in mental health and sit in civics engagement and sit in the arts and sit in a whole range of other portfolios as well. So we do have young people with disability, with lived experience of disability, and one of the key things that I would say about the advisory groups is that the qualification to be appointed as a member of the advisory group is lived experience. We don't seek young people with leadership experience, or they don't have to prove they have leadership experience. We seek young people with lived experience, and I ensure that in every advisory group we have representation from across all forms of intersectionality. That's really important to me.
Thank you very much, Minister. My reframe question to Senator Steele-John and Senator Hughes is, what will you do to ensure that the voices of young people with disability are included in decision making? I'll pass to you, Senator Steele-John.
Well, we have commitments as a party to the proposal of providing $150 million for direct funding for disability pride events and gatherings across the nation as part of Disability Pride Week, and an increase to advocacy funding for disabled organisations. I also think, though, it's important for us as a community to recognise that actually in passing the NDIS bill in the way that they did last year, the government and also the opposition made really clear that they're not massively interested in the views of disabled people. They rammed through that legislation despite the almost unanimous opposition of our organisations and so many of us. And so I think it's actually important for us now to look at how we build our political power as a community and apply that power to a parliament where no one party has a majority in their own right. And everybody has to be subjected to the lobbying and the deadly advocacy of disabled people.
Thank you very much, Senator Steele-John. Senator Hughes.
Thank you. I think it's really important that people walk the walk, and that when they want to talk about developing young people and having some experience with young people with a disability, that they actually actively engage and do what they should be doing. And I'm talking about employing people with a disability and trying to advocate for them in a real way. I had a staffer start with me at the very beginning of my term. He's been with me nearly 6 years with autism. And when he started with the most basic of tasks, and he now runs our mail-out programs and does a whole lot of things that are much higher level, as he's been supported through working in my office. There aren't a lot of politicians who do that, and I think that's time to change, but it's across the world and across the corporate sector that we need to see people actually prepared to put their money where their mouth is. I just want to spend a little bit of time. It's important that we've got people with a disability and lived experience of disability having a voice. I want to also say it's really important for the people with disability who don't have a voice, who aren't able to advocate for themselves. And sometimes it's their siblings, sometimes it's their parents or their carers that have to advocate on their behalf. And too often there's people with a disability who can loudly speak up and advocate on behalf of themselves, but as the parent of a child who can't, and I know there's a lot of people in this room who have children who can't advocate for themselves, who need someone to advocate for them, it's important that those voices are at the table as well, and that we make sure that people have the opportunity, particularly for the siblings of those who quite often become the carers, that their voices are recognised and the things that they do, because they provide a lot of care for no cost to the rest of society, but can come at a very great cost to them personally. So it's important that we have the full range of voices, not just those who have the ability to advocate for themselves.
Thank you, Senator. I have one last question here, and then we're going to open the floor to the audience. So I hope that you've been having a think about some questions you would like to ask our panel. The last question I have here is from Square Peg Round Hole, which is a volunteer-led organisation based in the Wheat Belt. And their question is, given the severe and ongoing lack of accessible, sustainable services in regional and remote communities across WA, what is your party's plans to address these systemic service gaps? I will pass to you, Minister Ali.
Thank you. Well, that's what you get when you have a market-run program. And unfortunately, that's what's happened with the NDIS. I mean, my other portfolio is early childhood education and care, and we've seen the same thing, where it's based on, you know, where people can make money as opposed to where the services are needed. We have services that are available in a city and in suburbs, but very few in rural and regional because services don't make money in those places. That's what happens when you allow a national disability scheme to become run by the market as opposed to a national disability scheme that is participant focused and puts participants at the centre. And that's the work that we're trying to do, is bring the NDIS back to being about participants and putting them at the centre.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Steele-John.
Yes, thank you. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the NDIS conceptually was always a market scheme, but with a strong market steward role for the agency and for the government. And that's often where we've seen so much of the problems with the scheme, is where either the agency hasn't done that or where the government hasn't also intervened to support that. I think it's really important that when we talk about choice and necessary rights for disabled people, we don't add a caveat that says for only disabled people that live in the city. We need to make sure those things are upheld for people in the regions in rural Australia. We are proposing an increase in advocacy funding precisely because we know that particularly rural and regional advocacy services are really buckling under the pressure right now, as well as an increase to healthcare funding and education funding that is actually inclusive and accessible, directed at the regions as well.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Hughes.
Thank you. Wow. I think we just heard a really big policy shift around how the NDIS is going to be run. It's not going to be market driven anymore.
I thought
that's a very big announcement, Minister Ali. That's the NDIS is no longer going to be market run, that we're going to have full-blown government intervention into the running of services. It's actually completely the antithesis of the ethos of the scheme. And when my son was diagnosed, we lived in Moree, and for those of you who don't know, that's very remote, far northwest New South Wales. We lived 80 k's out of town on a farm, so it was a 160k round trip to the supermarket. So I'm aware of the challenges. It is very, very difficult in rural and regional centres. This is one of the reasons, if foundational supports, if they are what we think they might be, when we eventually find out a return to some of those community-based programs, would actually be a positive for people in rural and regional areas, because they're run by community, they're local and they touch locals and they're driven for the community. At the moment, we're seeing organisations going in, and you've only got to look at the price guide to see the price differential for organisations to work in rural and regional and remote areas, and it is very, very significant. One of the problems that we did see with the scheme, though, were providers taking advantage of this, and they were going into remote areas, and I think Rachel Siewert would maybe remember some of the inquiries we did where we heard that providers were going to remote areas, seeing 5 or 6 participants and charging every single participant the travel budget. So they were seeing 6 people on the trip, but they were charging their travel fees 6 times over. The scheme is not sustainable if we allow that kind of rorting to continue, but it is about choice and control, and that's why I would have thought the NDIS remaining market-driven was important, but you guys heard it here first tonight. Apparently the Labor government's got a different plan for the NDIS in the future. Back to big government behemoth block funding, get what you'd given.
Thank you, Senator. Minister Ali, would you like to respond, and can you confirm that the Labor government would like to move away from the market-run?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for allowing me to respond. The point that I was making was that under the Liberals, this scheme was allowed to become...
Sorry, you've had a couple of responses. Under the Liberals, you've proudly announced this was your designed scheme. So you set the scheme up and that hasn't changed. So you can't say under the Liberals when you've proudly announced it was your scheme.
Senator,
that you set up.
I will give you some time to respond, but this is Minister Ali's moment, please. Thank you.
Can I have it both ways?
Can I?
Oh, God,
Can I speak, please?
I'm waiting for the next policy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hollie. I really apologise to everybody here. I was hoping that this would be very civil, and I hope that we can continue civilly, if that's okay. Thank you, Hollie. What my point is that under the Liberals for 9 years, who had the scheme for 9 years, it became very much about a market-run scheme. It became, the levels of fraud were up there. We saw from the Royal Commission what the situation was like. Jordon, you mentioned about the market-run, yes, but the government having a role in the governance of it. And I think that's where we can make more difference there, is having that kind of stewardship role in how the NDIS is run. And that's what I was referring to, is not allowing it to be wholly and solely market run, because we know that when it's wholly and solely market run, the market will not go to rural and regional areas where it is more expensive to provide services, where they're not for-profit providers who are not providing services there. So more having a government stewardship role, and that's where I see the changes, and that's where I see the difference in the NDIS going.
Thank you, Minister. And can you provide a yes or no answer? Will the Labor government be committing to shifting away from the market-led NDIS?
What I'm saying is that in our process
yes
of
or no,
bringing...
please.
What I'm saying is we will be looking at how do we reform the NDIS if that requires that we have more government stewardship in the NDIS, then that's, that if that is what is required, if that's what people living with disability are telling us, then that is something that we should be looking at. I don't think that should be completely off the table, but I do think that already we are doing some things around market intervention with the pricing of NDIS, with the Section 10 that we've put in. So we are already taking more of that kind of stewardship role in the NDIS rather than just leaving it as it was.
Thank you, Minister. We are going to open it up to the floor now. Whoa, we have a lot of questions. So please raise your hand or ask a peer if you can to get some attention. We're also going to, because there are a lot of questions for the ministers and senators, we are going to cut your response down to 30 seconds. So thank you very much. Best of luck. I believe we have a question up the front.
Thank you very much for the microphone. Excuse me, my name is Andrew Fairbairn. I work for an organisation called Limbs for Life, the peak body for amputees in Australia. I would like to have a look at optics. How people in the general public look at people with disabilities, and we have become a cost burden. We know that for each dollar spent by the NDIS returns $2.25 to the Australian economy. We are still seen as cost burden. My own products, what I use as a below-knee amputee, have gone up in price so much because with NDIS, they can and they do. When is any of you guys, and I have the utmost respect for all of you, but when are you going to fix it? This price gouging by providers, I will ask you a question. I would love you to go out tomorrow and see if you can get a price list for prosthetics in Australia, because you won't get it. Not one single company will give it to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Minister Ali, would you like to respond? We've got 30 seconds and I will keep you to time.
Yep, 100% agree with you with price gouging, and that's something that we've really cracked down on. Also completely agree with you that people with disability, and I don't think it's have become, I think people with disability have always been looked on as a burden. And I think that this is when we talk about what does inclusion look like and what does inclusion mean, having a shared understanding of what inclusion looks like, that is beyond access. It's beyond just a ramp, but it is actually the full participation of people. And I think that we can get the NDIS back onto delivering that.
Thank you very much. Senator Steele-John.
Thank you, and hello, Andrew. I'll tackle your question directly, my friend. We need to get the government in the business again of identifying precisely where certain AT providers, certain prosthetic providers, and others that make disability equipment are in fact ripping people off by monopolising the market so that they then charge whatever they like. What we are seeing in the disability tools and equipment sector is that monopolisation, like with Coles and Woolies, and they just charge what they like. We need the government to break them up, and that's why I'm quite worried about some of the bill changes that have been brought in that make it harder to request different types of tech, because that reduces competition.
Appreciated. Senator Hughes.
Yeah, Andrew, look, you're 100% right with the price distortions that we're seeing across the board, and this is where the price guide is playing a very bad role in what it's doing with where the market is not in there enough, because there's sort of a rate that everyone can charge. And I'm sure we've all heard stories about people that need a ramp, or not a ramp, but like a rail put in a bathroom for access, and it costs $3,000 via the NDIS, whereas you can buy it for $50 from Bunnings. And I've met with many parents who've just, whilst waiting for a provider, done it themselves. This is because of the way the price guide's modelled. I can't tell you the number of organisations who have come in and said, would you get rid of the price guide? And
thank you, Senator. Appreciated. We have a question online from Jake, and the question is, given that disability-related costs often prevent people from saving for a house deposit, will the government introduce a low deposit or no deposit home loan scheme for people with disabilities similar to those available for first home buyers in other demographic groups? Minister Ali.
That's not on the table for the government as far as I understand, but I don't see why people with disability can't also access the other schemes that we have for people into home loans. I often say to people, you are not a semicolon and. You know, I'm not a semicolon and, you're not a semicolon and I think we have to do more to ensure that quote unquote mainstream services fulfil their responsibilities to be inclusive of people with disability too.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Steele-John.
Yeah, so in the housing space, we are proposing a freeze on rent increases for the next 2 years, a cap of 2% for every year after that. And for both mortgage and rental, we want to see the government invest in large-scale building of housing again. Specifically for disabled people, though, we know that we must change the building codes here in Western Australia to bring them in line with the rest of the country, mandating full access and inclusion when constructing residential properties.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes.
I guess one of the issues is for people with a disability, especially those who are having parents that are acting on their behalf in the purchase of a property, they're quite often missing out on things like first home buyer grants and stamp duty exemptions because they have a guardian or someone working on their behalf because they're not able to do it themselves. And I think there are the sorts of regulations that can be looked at, that if parents are buying an apartment or an accommodation for their child with a disability, that child with a disability, who's probably an adult, that they have the ability to access things that other home buyers have at that first home buyer point, so that those families aren't they're not being punished for trying to help their child live some sort of life of independence. And
Thank
so
you,
I
Senator.
think there's those schemes we can look at.
Thank you. We're going to take another question from the room. We're trying to get through as many questions as possible, so please try not to replicate questions, and if you could stick to just the question rather than making comment prior, it would be very appreciated.
Hey, Carrie Clark, I'm the CEO of Kind. We're a membership-based organisation supporting 7,000 West Australian families who are caring for children with disabilities, and we're currently seeing the impacts of big NDIS reform on those families and impacts as those families are waiting for foundational supports. So my question to all of you is, how are you going to ensure that children at very crucial stages in their development are not disadvantaged by NDIS reforms?
Thank you, Carrie. Minister Ali.
Thanks, Carrie, and thank you also for the important work that you do as well. And I take your point that in a child's life, 6 months of waiting or 3 months of waiting your time is relative, right? So 6 months of waiting means that any developmental delays are even more exacerbated in those 6 months of waiting. You know, as I said, with foundational supports, we're working through that, and hopefully by July they're supposed to be in. And you know, that's the answer that I can give you, that we're working through that, and hopefully those can be in. But I do recognise that for children in particular, the longer waiting time means more developmental delays. It's more acute.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Steele-John.
Thank you. Well, you're absolutely right. The reality is right now, kids are bearing the brunt of these cuts and these changes to the law, again, in precisely the fashion that it was warned that they would. The reality is that the changes that have been made to the scheme have not been driven by policy or by a genuine attempt to fix the problems that existed. They were driven by politics. And they can be fixed by politics. I'm really hopeful that a parliament that is a parliament when no one party controls the agenda is a parliament that can, in fact, fix the problems that actually existed with the NDIS and return the rights and protections that parents, that families and disabled people previously had to oppose these services being removed.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes.
Thank you, and thank you, Carrie, for your question. And the reality is, and I think it's important we all do tell the truth when we speak about these things. Jordon was there when we asked the NDIA about these reforms and what was going to happen with them. It's a 5-year program, so families for the next 5 years are going to be struggling with what these changes mean. They're not defined. We don't have a list of foundational supports. We don't know what the financial sustainability model looks like. It's been refused to be given to us, so nobody has a real answer there. What I would say to you and to your families, you have the amazing Andrew Whitehouse here, and I remember dealing with Tanya Rodwell, who was involved in the organisation and production of Toby. I still don't know where it's kind of gone. I think it's gone to Monash University. It was the most amazing app and book that families could use
Thank you, Senator.
to work through issues.
We have a question online from Gabriel, and it is, more people with disabilities are needing to go to the Administrative Review Tribunal against the NDIA, but it is almost impossible to get community legal support. Does your party commit to increasing funding of community legal centres to ensure people with disability have equal access across Australia's legal system? Minister Ali.
Thank you. I will take that question on notice if I can, because the community legal centres are funded by the Attorney General, and so I understand that we do have a commitment to fund community legal centres, but not. I can't answer if it's specifically for people with disability, but I will take that on notice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Senator Steele-John.
Yes, emphatically yes. When I've travelled around WA, one of the things that has been shared so clearly with me is that the community legal services are really at breaking point, not able to take on new clients, not able to deal with the supports that they are being requested to provide. So too for the individual and systemic advocacy services in WA, where we've committed, as I said earlier, a really significant amount of money to the federal funding for those organisations. So we're absolutely stepping up in that regard.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes.
Well, I'd like to see an NDIS where less parents need to, or less participants need to find a lawyer to fight the agency. As we saw in the budget, the government's just given the agency more money to fund more lawyers to fight all of you. I would like to see a planning process with people with a disability and people aware of a disability, and they have some personal experience. At the moment, planners are dealing with everyone from, cerebral palsy to motor neuron disease to autism to acquired brain injury, and they have absolutely no understanding, which is why people are ending up in the situations they are. We need to do better at the planning process so that people are actually getting the plans that they need with planners that know what's going on. It shouldn't be about funding more lawyers. It should be about getting it right at the start so families who are already at breaking point aren't forced to go to this tribunal, which we do know because Senator. I do a lot in autism. They're settling on the steps 97% of the time.
Thank you, Senator. I would like to acknowledge that it is 10 minutes to 8. We do have permission to continue through until 8:30. I want to remind everyone that this is being recorded, so if you do need to leave, please, you can access the recording online after this event. I'm going to ask a question from the room.
Yes or no answer, please. Can we have a real commitment from you all, from every one of you, to work across political lines for climate action, please?
Yes or no answer. Minister Ali.
I think our policies on climate change and the fact that we believe in climate change speak for themselves, and I think the Labor Party has made significant progress on addressing climate change in the 3 years that we've been in government.
Thank you, Minister Ali. Yes or no, Senator Steele-John?
Yes, indeed, I absolutely will commit to that, and did so during the last Parliament on the issue of the NDIS. Weirdly enough, Linda Reynolds and a couple of other Liberal senators actually ended up voting against the NDIS bill changes because of the work we did together. So I'm happy to continue that.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused. Was the question on climate change or NDIS? Because Jordon just answered a question on NDIS. I'm not sure I understand the question, because I can tell you we have very different policies when it comes to how we believe we should deal with carbon reduction. So I can't imagine that's going to be something you've got a unanimous position on across party lines.
Okay.
But certainly when it comes to the NDIS, being honest and truthful and upfront and actually having real and frank discussions should be bipartisan. And I've been very pleased to work with Senator Steele-John on a lot of things over the last 2 terms of Parliament.
And if that was in fact a question on climate, I can certainly say yes. I would be stunned if a Liberal came to my office and wanted to work on climate change. But if that did happen, of course, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Thank you, Senator. We'll take another question from the room and then we'll take one online.
Hi, my name is Jan Gothard and I'm from an organisation called Welcoming Disability, which advocates for changes to the discriminatory migration health requirements. The Attorney General's Department has recently called, thank you Jordon, has recently called for a review, has recently agreed to review the recommendations of the Disability Royal Commission, including recommendation 4.31, which notes that the Migration Act, as you may not be aware, is currently exempt from the Disability Discrimination Act.
Your question, please.
Which, as the Disability Royal Commission pointed out, means that the Migration Act, migration regulations are authorised, in terms, that's the term that the DRC uses, authorised to discriminate against people with disability on the basis of community cost, because, as Andrew pointed out, people with disabilities in this community are seen as a burden. My question to the representatives of the parties is, when this is put to you, will you agree that the Migration Act should no longer be exempt from the Disability Discrimination Act? Thank you.
We will spice things up and go Senator Hughes, if you would like.
I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry, but I can tell you I have fought on behalf of many, many families who've had their migration status threatened over the last couple of years because 5-10 years after they've had children here who've then been diagnosed with autism or acquired a disability, and we have had to fight very, very hard to make sure that those families were able to stay. In fact, even when we were in government, I remember when Alex Hawke was Immigration Minister, calling him one day and saying, I'm about to write to you, but I'm very cross. And he said, I'm not having this fight with you, we'll fix it straight away. Well, they haven't changed it within the Act, no. Not this term, no.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Steele-John.
Our immigration system is ableist, and that ableism needs to be removed. It is disgusting that in 2025 a disabled person born here to non-disabled parents will trigger the deportation of that family, as it is disgusting that a disabled person would be prevented from emigrating in the first place. I'm proud to be part of a party that will amend that Act at the earliest possible opportunity and achieve the first step towards that goal in this Parliament with a review of the legislation and an increase to some of the cost parameters when burden is assessed under the system.
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. We do have to... sorry, my words have just escaped my mind. Would you like to respond, Minister Ali?
Thank you. I have dedicated pretty much most of my life to ensuring that we do not have a discriminatory migration process. Thank you for raising that with me. That's something that I was not aware of, and it's certainly a fight that I will take up.
Thank you, Minister Ali.